Hi, this is a T-70M 1/35th scale model from MiniArt. This is the first model I've made from the company MiniArt, and for what it is, it's a pretty decent model. But also for what it is, it caused me some troubles. And I wouldn't put the fault on MiniArt. This is definitely on my shoulders. Anyway, I've already pre-built this thing off camera, so let's go through, let's paint it, let's take it to wherever it ends up. And maybe we'll all learn a tour thing. Dang, public school getting to me again. Starting from the literal top, today's observational award goes to the turret. I just wanted to point out that it needs some turret hooks on this side, and then one over here, as well as one in the back. I point this out because I like to make my own rather than use the ones in the kit, just because it adds a little bit of something. Same with the grab handles, I'll also do those. And to make these, I just loop some copper around a toothpick, kind of give it a squeeze, and then all you can do is just glue it on. And while I'm not showing it, grab handles are made in a similar way, except that you drill into the plastic. After a little super glue, it'll look a little something like this. But don't worry, these aren't part of the mistakes. No, that's coming up with one of my questionable decisions. And the next big step is priming. This is Autoborn Sealer in gray. It's kind of a lighter gray than I like, so we're going to change that. Using one of my fountain pen inks. This is Noodler's Heart of Darkness. It's an aniline dye-based ink. I have like 2 bottles of it, so I'm trying to get rid of it. The final mix-in is some Createx Black in gloss. I do recommend the regular over this one. But either way, I mixed all this junk together to create a neutral gray base coat, so I don't have to spray it twice. I mean, I hope. Now you might be thinking, that's a really odd choice to use as your primer, your main adhesion to the plastic. And my answer to that is, why yes, it is. But in the words of David Fairgoot, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. But this too was a great mistake. So my next goal is subtractive chips, which means chipping fluid. Which this stuff gets sprayed everywhere in a thick... No, I'm not finishing that thought. I haven't found the prime or best application method for chipping fluids, so I'm not going to say I'm best at it or you should follow what I do. Just, spray your load at... Not again. So about 2-ish coats on the lower hull gives it a kind of a satiny look, which supposedly will allow me to reactivate it with water, then use a paintbrush, a scratchy device to make some really good chips. Oh, and not the chips you eat. That's not this kind. This is really the rust kind. But it could be tasty, so I won't judge. And we'll find out about that supposedly later. Right now, let's spray the lower hull with an entire coat of Russian 4BO by MO. Now, my opinion towards the what color did the Russians use during World War II is pretty easy. If it looks green, it probably was shipped out the door. Considering their metallurgy skills were kind of a guess and hope it turns out right, I'm imagining they're not going to be like, ooh, that Russian 4BO and that Russian 4BO are not the same. Really, Comrade Ivan? Hence my, it's good enough, comrade, send out to war. Next, we can take a little bit of old wood, mix that into the 4BO just to make it a little lighter, a little less desaturated. So we can then use a cloudy, random pattern to add some variation and some depth to the base color. Some call it color modulation, which will give it this kind of effect. So as you can see, we've got some lighter spots, some darker spots. It doesn't look like it's one flat color, it's just a variation of the two. But what about the chipping, you ask? Well, I've already started this process a little bit, but let me show you what I've learned. In between this shot right here and the prior one where it was spinning on a disc, 2 weeks had passed. That means 2 weeks for the paint to cure more. Which means, unlike 2 weeks prior, it's now harder and more difficult to remove via water. And this was taking a lot of water to get anywhere. And it was using a lot of force to get somewhere. In fact, I added a little bit of paint thinner just to help it along. And what was the outcome for it? Well, not that much. The chips themselves weren't too bad, but it's missing all the little small details, like the little blending and some of the other small areas and tiny chips that makes it more believable. So instead I used the additive method, using a sponge here to dab on and add a lot more chips. It wasn't what I wanted to do originally, but I mean, it'll still work out in the end, so that's fine.
Like I plan.
From here we can go and pull out the rust washes. These are enamels. And when I'm slightly under the influence of paint thinners, my methodology is just touch it everywhere.
That doesn't sound right.
And here I'm adding 2 different colors of rust wash, just so I can get some of that wet blending effect, while also adding a little bit more depth and interest to it. Skipping ahead a little bit, we can start adding some mineral spirits to dilute it, spread it around, kind of blend it out. But I do want to point out one thing.
That'd be a lot of rusty wash.
Arguably way more than I ever intended. I mean, the entire effect is supposed to be subtle, not all-encompassing.
Yeah, subtle.
Luckily, with rust washes, you can add a little bit more mineral spirits, wipe it down, remove some of it, and make it back to where it should be. Like brushing unruly hair, but more cancerous. Which will look a little something like this. But the perfectionist in me says, wait, hold on, this doesn't look right. And I really wasn't sure why. And then I remembered, oh wait, I didn't do any pin washes. Duh. Using some dark brown for green vehicles, great name by the way, we can add a little bit of pop, a little bit of grime in all of those channels and recessed areas.
That's a lot of S's at once.
But assuming your brush isn't as wide as mine, you should be able to do this without any touch-ups. But let's move down to the ground. These are, of course, the tracks, but not the ones the kit came with. Oh no, those were destroyed in a freak assembly accident.
Ossifer, I swear to drunk I wasn't drinking.
Regardless of my life choices, the next step is to add some track wash. It's one of those mindless things that I'm just turning my brain off and just wiping a brush on it. But I had found that during this process, it reactivated the bonds between the 2 pieces and it slowly broke apart, which left me with a bunch of smaller segments. Normally I try to keep it in at least 1 or 2 pieces, but I'm not buying a 3rd set, so we're gonna roll with the punches. We are finally nearing the end of this, so let's put everything together and see where I made my biggest mistake. Which I found out because as I was putting the tracks on, some things happened. And I was able to get one side on pretty well. I do think it turned out quite nice, the look is great, but let's get up close here. Do you notice anything strange going on? Particularly on this last road wheel over here. So that random gray section is bare plastic. And it's not the only one, there's a couple other that I'll be pointing out here. What happened was, as I was maneuvering the tracks onto the piece, using some super glue, I had to reposition some of it, which normally isn't a problem, except it lifted the entire paint layer down to bare plastic. And this isn't the only area. In a couple spaces where I've had a tiny bit of glue on my hands, it pulled everything. There are some other areas where I guess it rubbed up against something or I hit it, I'm not entirely sure, but it also went straight to the base layer. One could assume that it's, the chipping layer that I put on. I didn't necessarily clear over it or varnish it or anything, which I normally would have tried to do, but I don't think this is the issue here. No, I think it's a different type of user error. One that started from the very beginning. And no, I'm not talking about my strange concoction for a base coat. Instead, what I think happened is the original plastic, straight from the kit, still had machining oil on it. Now, I'm not the type to go and strip off all these oils ahead of time. In fact, I've only ever had an issue similar to this 2 other times, but those were the first 2 models I've ever painted. And to be honest, I could attribute that to the paint I was using and not necessarily user error. But at this point, I was completely done with this project. I don't care. I know it could be finished in a lot of time, but it could be finished. I don't want to look at it anymore. I don't want to see it. I don't want to think about it. I am done. So, if there's anything you'd like to say, let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, I will be taking this model and putting it where it belongs.